Thanks, Chris. Welcome, everyone. Thanks again for joining this session. Again, as Chris, this is designed to be an interactive session. As you have questions on any of the content or any of the things that we're going over, feel free to use the raise hand and interject. So today's session, kind of the overview is identity-based security, how to basically centrally control a decentralized environment. So a modern approach to security, kind of the shift to zero trust, the change of moving away from trust and verify. And the identity-based security is really the keystone feature of zero trust security. So today's agenda, we're gonna talk about the need for change. Why do organizations need to change? What's driving the change? What is zero trust? How does identity-based security fit into it? And then how do we get there? So just kind of looking at the overall process, what's going on in the landscape, what is it, and then how do we get there? So we'll kind of jump right in. The need for change really is, this is a good representation of the typical legacy workspace. Just protect the front door, everything's inside your four walls. You own the network, you own the WAN, you own access in and out, you own the devices, you own all of the identity, all the data. So all of those things is under your control. Typically there's one or two ways in. You might have a reverse proxy or something like that, but generally the only way to get into your environments in those days was VPN. So you, again, tied to your identity. You had a very slow, controlled pace of change. You owned all of the projects, you deployed all the new services. Anything that you wanted to implement in your environment, you had full control over. You owned the security, you owned the identity into those, and integrating the identity in. It was kind of the old school legacy traditional workplace, also referred to as castle and moat or trust and verify model. What's driving the change? Really the modern workplace, the explosion of cloud applications, of data services, multiple cloud vendors, AI, the advantage of the cloud, looking at all of the different services that are out there, explosion of devices and device types, BYO initiatives from users wanting to carry either a single phone and use it for both personal and work activities. The big piece as highlighted on this is that you're losing or limiting control, but you have the ability still to control identity. Identity is your central control. It also is directly tied to cost for your SaaS applications, licensing to all of the services that your users want to get access to. You're also being pushed to increased need to collaborate with your partners and your customers, kind of like we're doing right now with a remote meeting. Users again have multiple devices and they want to be able to work from anywhere, so get to the data from where they happen to be. They want kind of the easiest way to get to the data, kind of the work anywhere, anytime mindset, whether they're traveling or in a home office or in the actual office. So the other things that are driving it really is the rapid pace of change of cloud services. So it's a little bit out of your control. You subscribe to a service, Office 365 and the Azure services that are related to that are a great example of that. The roadmap and the Office Notification Center is pretty full of features that are under development or under deployment. Chances are that from when you first subscribed to Office 365 to today, there's a bunch of new services, and if you're not keeping up with those and know what's out there, there could be services and things that your users are using that you may not be aware of. There are some advantages gained by this environment. There's definitely a reduced adoption timeline because of lower requirements to entry. So you don't have to deploy, generally you don't have to deploy hardware and storage for those services. It's more of adopting them, configuring them, and allowing your users access. So it shifts from a hardware deployment to a adoption, change management, communications type deployment environment. The services are easy to turn on rather than a traditional deployment. But typically security gets left out of that equation. It gets pushed to the background. The users want it now. They're like, hey, I just want to have access to this. I'll just go sign up. A lot of the cloud services have self-sign up, and they may be using your identity to access those services. So you can kind of get into a kind of a bind there where the users are using services that you don't know they're using. What else is driving the change? Well, there's some bad things actually that are going on as well. So the bad actors actually are very aware of the known cloud providers. They understand there's actually, Microsoft tells stories of people that they actually monitor when people sign up and associate their tenant. They change their MX record to point to Office 365 as kind of a trigger for them to get added into the threat vector for phishing and social engineering attacks. After you're done telling your users never give out your credentials, you adopt Office 365 and have them log in everywhere. So it's kind of they get used to that, they get conditioned to it. The social engineering and phishing attacks definitely increase as you adopt cloud services. The other things that are contributing to it, vendors, again, are moving their apps to the cloud. You're all being probably pushed by some of your traditional appliances that are in your environment are now moving to cloud services where the vendor has control of those and lowers their time to upgrade. You get the features faster, those type of things. There's advantages to it. Your users are probably also pushing you with the desire for BYO. They also want to be able to get to data wherever they happen to be. They also want access to new apps, new services as quickly as they can. Things like COVID, obviously the pandemic that's going on right now, pushing people to remote work is also driving the change. There was somewhat of a drive over the last few years for reduced kind of a co-share inside an office environment. We helped a couple customers build that proof of concept for them where they had a number of users that were sharing a cube but also working from home for periods of time. So there's a lot of different things that are driving the need for change. And then securing that environment and monitoring that environment is a challenge. Your audit and compliance requirements, the legislature seems to be very good at cranking out compliance requirements. And then how do you investigate all these cloud services? If you have a problem or you think you have a problem, how do you access the information across systems? How do you know where those identities are being used? So there's a lot of different things that are driving the need for change. And again, identity is at the core of that. So knowing where your identity is used, how it's used, and what the requirements are to leverage that identity all help you get those things under control. Let's talk a little bit about identity-based security. So I like this quote. I thought it was appropriate as I was putting this together. It's kind of encapsulates it. Just ensuring authentication and authorization are both secure and appropriate across all sanctioned services. So there's a lot in that statement. It's a pretty short statement, but it goes to, who are you? Where are you coming from? What are you trying to do? What applications are you trying to get to? Is your connection secure? Where are you coming from? So there's a lot that goes behind that statement, but it's a really clear and concise statement. So, identity-based security is one of the core principles of the Zero Trust framework, and we'll talk about Zero Trust here in a few minutes. Having the identity-based security also helps address some of your security challenges. So it helps you lay down that baseline of security for your environment so that you can have kind of those lower barriers of adoption to cloud services. It also puts some things in place for you to be able to be prepared for things that you're unaware of as users are leveraging their identity in other areas and other capacities, that you have a minimum baseline to capture that information, to audit that information and ensure that the use is appropriate. All of your users generally have a single identity. It's both a good and a bad thing. As you think about the identity, if a single identity is compromised and they have access across multiple systems, 10, 12, 15 apps, then the attacker has all they have to do is figure out what services are there. They can try some of the major services and they'll have access to whatever that user has access to. It's also a good thing. With reduced accounts and integrated single sign-on, reduced sign-on type environments, it's a better overall user experience. It can help lower your costs for support, reduce calls to your help desk, that type of thing, because they've got a single account. You've got integrated single sign-on. You've got really one account to manage across the environment. So as I mentioned, really identity is at the center of security for this particular say use case as you're thinking about deploying zero trust or what it means to deploy zero trust. It all starts with identity, and we'll get into the zero trust and where identity fits into all those. But the reality is user credentials are always at risk. I'll highlight some breach statistics. Chris and I have given a couple of security seminars in the past, but a lot of the information we get, excuse me, we get from Microsoft on the breaches and the things that are going on in the world today. About 80% of the breaches are caused by compromised credentials, either weak or stolen passwords. So the password databases on the dark web are growing. The sharing and collaboration that we all do on a daily basis. The bad actors in the world are also doing similar things, and they're sharing accounts and passwords for people to try to do different things, different engineering attacks. A lot of passwords are duplicates. People tend to regionally reuse passwords, or they'll use passwords across multiple systems. Roughly about 80% of employees use non-approved apps for work, whether it's something as simple as I'm going to leverage Evernote instead of OneNote, or I'm going to leverage a Notepad Plus, just wherever the app happens to be. It may or may not be an approved app for work, and it may or may not be connected to cloud services, so you don't know where your data is going. A lot of cases, there's personally identifiable information in there. So PII is also in the social engineering world. They're going to try and get that information to either take on or take over an identity. So all these kind of build up the reasons of why user identity is kind of a core or centerpiece of all of this. Once a bad actor has compromised identity, they have the ability to get into the cloud services. They potentially can get into the device and take over the device. They can then log into your apps as you, and they kind of own your data. So that last piece is one of the reasons why, probably 2 or 3 years ago, we looked at trusted locations for multi-factor access to say, if you're coming from our network, we're not going to require it. But if the device has been compromised, even if it's on your network and you don't have multi-factor, the bad actor can do whatever they want to do. But if you do have multi-factor, they're probably going to get caught. Microsoft looks at the authentication statistics and the things that are going on, and their estimate is that right around 99% of attacks were thwarted just by multi-factor alone. If you're not approving or not looking at your apps where your credentials are being used, you have a little control over the identity there or how it's managed. Again, getting a handle on what's going on in your environment, what the use cases are. The other thing that I thought was very interesting as I was putting this together was some of the statistics around, and when I read this, I was like, well, I do the same thing. Your users are leveraging the same corporate passwords for their own personal accounts. So as opposed to coming up with a new password for my personal banking or my healthcare login or whatever, I'm going to reuse a corporate password. So it's less passwords I have to manage. So now I've got a personal email and a password that's the same as my work email and password. How much, if that bank or that service gets compromised, they're going to look at, oh, hey, this guy's got a LinkedIn profile. Here's his work. They can put 2 and 2 together. All that type of intelligence is available to the people in the bad actor community. So kind of thinking about it, all together, as identity is the basis and the control plane. So being able to secure and control identity is critical. Obviously in this picture with identity right in the heart, it's knowing what apps are being leveraged by your corporate credentials, knowing who has access to your data, customers, partners, guest accounts, how you're managing those accounts, what all those accounts are connected to, whether they're internal systems or cloud systems, whether they're travel or analysis systems, where they happen to sit. Understanding all of those potential vectors is very important. The other thing to keep in mind is that you don't know what controls your partners or vendors place on their own accounts. So as you invite people in to collaborate, what are the controls on their accounts? If their account's compromised and you have a share to your data with that account, what controls, what do you have to be able to protect those accounts? How do you keep those accounts secure? How do you monitor what your vendors and customers are doing? You do have the ability to place, with conditional access, you have the ability to place controls on guest accounts. So you may not want the same, say, a higher level of security on them, but you can lock down what the guest accounts can do in your environment. So again, using the security and identity as your central control point, you have the ability to at least raise the level of comfort for your security folks. So we'll talk a little bit about how to solve, reduce, or mitigate problems. You're looking at, I've mentioned bad actors. They're using creative and sophisticated attacks. They're actually using AI to engineer attacks. They're using branding and screen scrapes and fake sites that are very close to, if not, there'll be a letter off. They'll kind of bury the URLs in there. I've seen some pretty interesting attacks that are out there, particularly in the phishing, as people get more and more used to clicking through things and signing in. The digital landscape, as I mentioned, is growing daily. The request to leverage those applications by your users and your user base for your businesses are increasing, and they want to get there faster. It's also much more challenging to secure, and having security out in front of that generally gets pushed to the background. Having an integrated way to look at all that information is also can be a challenge. If you think about implementing a on-premise based SIEM, how do you integrate with all these cloud applications? How do you collect that information? It can be very costly from a time and expense standpoint to get that in, to ingest that data, to filter it, all those type of things. Well, the good news is that you can actually leverage the cloud to secure the cloud. So we'll talk about some of those kind of things in the next few slides. But the advantages of leveraging cloud for intelligent, I'll say, analysis of what's going on in the cloud, but also to connect the audit logs that are available in the cloud services that you're subscribing to, as well as how your identity is being used, so tying it into Azure Active Directory, tying it into your SIEM, and looking at those signals and being able to address it all raises your confidence level and your ability to secure your environment, your identity, and your data. So identity-based security, again, identity is your control plane. You want to be able to manage that identity, so the identity lifecycle management becomes more important. Being able to provision, update, deprovision as appropriate, to license and delicense. Cost is now directly associated with identity. So you've got users that have access into cloud applications. Those cloud applications carry direct costs with them to have those licenses. So managed identity becomes very important, but also understanding strong authentication around those identities. So looking at single sign-on for applications, leveraging multi-factor, leveraging things like privileged identity management. So being able to have a kind of a least privilege or request admin privilege for them is becoming more and more important. The other thing you can do is extend the same principles to your devices. So looking at device signals to increase your security, and then looking at conditional access in Azure Active Directory to kind of pull it all together to adjust or deny access based on the signals. So looking at device location, application, the type of data they're trying to get to, the activity they're trying to perform, being able to measure all of those and control those is becoming more and more important, and gives you the ability to implement zero trust. So kind of the roadmap, how do you get there? This is one of my favorite slide. If you've been in presentations that I've given before, it should look familiar. I use this slide a lot just because of the kind of the mental image that it leaves me with. all starting with securing and protecting identity. It's kind of the big box around devices and apps and data. So once you have identity secure, you've set that minimum baseline. So everything kind of starts with identity and then moves on this page from left to right. Looking at strong authentication, so multi-factor authentication, understanding how you can reduce your surface area of attack by looking at the types of authentication that are going on. So, the true legacy authentication or, password clear text type authentication stuff is fairly easy to block. Leverage modern authentication where you can, leverage enlightened applications that support the authentication languages that are out there, and monitor, identify risk. So looking at what's going on with your data, how people are logging in, is it a problem? Do I have the same person trying to log in from two different geographies? Does that make sense? How can I look at the risk-based analysis of that? So it all, again, starts and ends with identity. As you build your roadmap, and we'll talk about the roadmap towards the end of this, you move into the other squares on this slide, thinking about device security to unlock some of the additional signals that you can look at, and then looking at enlightened secure cloud apps, and then as well protecting your data. You want to make sure that as you focus on your identity, you have this kind of iterative approach to security, so you can set that baseline with identity, but then be able to increase it as you go through your devices, go through your apps, and go through your data. So it's a journey. It's not zero trust. It's not a switch you throw on. It's actually a shift in thought. The one thing I will say about it, zero trust is one of the things I like about it is it does set a minimum bar, so that as you adopt new services and new things, whether you're aware of them or not, your users may be leveraging identity to get someplace, you already have that minimum bar set. So you've got a minimum set of security that's around an identity that's in use in your environment that you can leverage going forward. So the need for zero trust, what is zero trust? So as you shift from the traditional legacy environment to the modern workplace, why the need for zero trust? Your environments are moving from an isolated environment to a distributed environment. Your identities are also in that transition as well. So it's moving from a controlled environment where you have all of the keys to the kingdom. You control the firewall, you control the network, you control the WAN, you control identity provisioning and access to services. Everything is there, but you're moving this out, kind of flipping that out where your control is going away. The trust but verify or moat and castle analogy is outdated. The big thinking, so a lot of the think tanks, zero trust started up probably 5 or 6 years ago as cloud started to become very big. But why is it? Well, you really should consider the internet as open and untrusted. So every authentication, every app access, everything should be untrusted. So that's the term zero trust. As you're coming into the environment, you should be looking at every authentication attempt, every access attempt, understanding where they're coming from, what they're doing, and leverage identity to control that access, making sure that it conforms to what you want to, or the conditions and criteria that you want to place on that user or on that application. This is becoming more and more critical, particularly as you expand federated apps and SSO, so you're leveraging the single identity for multiple services. That makes things even more important. Again, as I mentioned, identity is tied to cost. As you think about SaaS licensing, Microsoft 365 licensing, all those type of things, you're going to have similar costs across the environment. Understanding how to manage that identity, manage the life cycle of that identity to keep your costs under control and kind of be able to reuse or reassign those licensing. The other pieces of automation for monitoring is even more important. Just the amount of signals that are coming into your environment. You think about a traditional environment, you may have, depending on what industry you're in manufacturing, you may have 10, 15 applications for your environment. In healthcare and legal, you're going to have probably upwards of 100 per user. So understanding how you how you secure and monitor all that internally is not all that hard. But then you think about all of the cloud applications and adding all of those signals, adding all the authentication, adding the device information, and then the information you're getting from those services. It just can be overwhelming to support manual monitoring of those. So leveraging AI, leveraging automation, and leveraging conditional or risk-based access policies makes your job a little bit easier. So SSO and zero trust also can provide a better end user experience. It also will scale as a, it's one of the advantages of cloud is that it will scale and work with your environment. So you don't have to deploy or adopt any new internal resources to support this. It will scale for you. And your users were already used to signing in. They know how to get in. They know how single sign-on works across those applications. And so you have an actual better experience for your end users. So as I mentioned, the castle and moat is kind of going away. We are, we're really in a permission or a position today where I feel like we trust too much, where even, our on-premises environments we trust and say, hey, if you're connected into my environment, then, I'm going to trust your access. So if you're on the network, you're good. It can be okay, but if the device is compromised, then, kind of all of that goes out the window. So what you want to do for zero trust is really flip the model. Start with the position of don't trust anything. Not your own environment, not your privileged IDs, not your accounts, not your partners, not your vendors. So you start from deny. So I don't trust you. I don't know where you're coming from. Who are you? So authentication and authorization. So as you come in, make sure you adopt strong authentication. Measure the signals. Look at them. Look at I'll mention some of the typical things that for risk-based analysis. So you look at impossible travel. You look at the geography where they're coming from. Microsoft also collects user profile data on how they're logging in, where they log in from, and they can raise risk flags based on, hey, this user typically works in the eastern side of the United States, and they're now trying to log in from Aruba or somewhere outside of that. What do I want to do with that information? So again, having that automation to be able to respond to those types of scenarios keeps your environment a little bit more secure. It reduces your attack surface area. It also makes life harder for the hackers. You eliminate some of their ways in and some of the things that they're used to using. A lot of those attacks can come from out of country, but increasingly they're leveraging anonymizers and remote VPNs to look like they're coming from particular areas. So as probably Chris or I have talked to you, location is becoming an increasingly less valuable signal because it can be faked, it can be masked by several tools fairly easily. Limiting access and entry to your environment and exercising control, particularly of administrative access. So just-in-time admin access, those type of things. Potentially leveraging split accounts for admins, even some of your service admins versus your enterprise admin type things. Also increasing your awareness. So as they monitor, alert, remediate what's going on. Do I see a rise in attacks for a particular account? Do I need to look at that account a little more in depth? Is a user doing things that they are not aware of? Just to be able to have those logs and the alerting and reporting there and available. It can also help you with compliance as you need. If you're a publicly traded company or you're an industry, excuse me, if you're in an industry that has to report those type of things, you have that log of what's going on in your environment. It can also aid in investigations. So looking at all of those things and understanding it, again, start with the deny. Make sure your authentication signals are strong. Leverage multi-factor, two-factor, whether it's Azure or another service provider. Look at all the signals, including device and location, all of those, and then monitor, report, and remediate. So leverage automated remediation in there. So there's a number of different pieces that go in there. And then the last one really is, okay, now that I have this information, what am I going to do? Grant, deny, or adjust, right? So yeah, everything looks good. You can go do what you're trying to do, or I'm going to deny it. I don't like the device you're on. I don't like the location you're coming from, those type of things. Or the user's okay, the location's okay. I don't like the device. So I'm off my normal device. I'm on an untrusted kiosk. I can reduce the actual access that I have where I may put in, so I can still read the information. I can get into it. I just can't copy, print, or download any information from there. So I can adjust or reduce the permissions that I would have to that application based on those signals. So you have that whole all of those options available at your disposal to be able to implement zero trust. So zero trust, the kind of the what is it? What are the advantages of it? So it enables you to quickly connect your workforce to just about any app. There are, last time I looked, over 3,000 apps in the Microsoft Azure App Store, and really any application that supports SAML can be connected to it. So the ability to leverage your identity and your investments in securing identity to connect to those applications increases your security posture. It also allows you to protect and govern access. So who has access, being able to recertify accounts. Can also help you increase collaboration and engagement with your customers and partners, and accelerate your adoption of some of those applications as well. You have this extensible security framework. You can, excuse me, you have the minimum bar that you set, and you can then, for more sensitive, so if you've got an HR application or a healthcare application in your environment, you can actually increase the controls for that particular application to make sure that that data is treated with a little bit more security than your standard data. And you can drive collaboration and again decrease barriers to adoption of services. So all these things are good in your environment. They make for happy users, happy employers. As an IT staff, you're able to be more flexible as you adopt these, but also be able to support the security initiatives of your environment. So we'll talk about a little bit about zero trust. I've mentioned it several times. So the principles of zero trust really are kind of the who, what, where, when, and why. So strong identity and access management. So as I've talked at length in this particular session, it all starts with strong identity and that identity-based security. So who are they? What are they trying to do? So authentication, authorization, leverage. Part of the zero trust model is leveraging least privilege. Most of the cloud services are very good at implementing role-based access, so that you can very granularly control what users have access to. You should be looking at leveraging privileged identity management as well, or just-in-time administrative management out there. Securing your data and devices as well. So we talked about kind of the follow-on to this. It's the next iterative piece of implementing zero trust, is making sure that your data is secure and your devices are secure. Zero trust also incorporates log and inspection. So looking at the data that you're collecting. What are people doing with their accounts? How are they leveraging it? How are they accessing it? And then automating and leveraging AI to either react to, remediate, or block access based on the signals that you're looking at. And I mentioned least privilege, making sure that the users have the right amount of privilege to do what they need to do, but nothing more, nothing excessive over that, to kind of reduce the chance, if there's a compromise, that account can actually do something very, very, very bad or very detrimental to the business. I've talked a little bit about some of the conditional access pieces, but as Chris and I have worked through a lot of these with customers, looking at the ability to do risk-based access and minimize some of the signals you see out there, and also either prompt again for multi-factor, or reduce the user's access. There's a lot of interesting things that you can do in that whole process. So those are kind of the building blocks of zero trust. Again, the zero trust approach is iterative, And it all starts with that security, identity-based security approach. So what does the model actually look like? So this is kind of the zero trust model, kind of moving from left to right, looking at the signals that are there, and in the center, analyzing those signals. What are you going to do with them? Are you going to allow access? Are you going to block access? And then providing the appropriate level of access or authorization into the applications and data. So zero trust is not a retrofit. It doesn't fit easily right on top of the legacy, trust but verify. It's a new model and a new security strategy. You're moving from trust but verify to everything is untrusted. Inspect all available signals, evaluate all conditions every time, not just once, but looking at every piece of data coming in and measuring those signals and looking at every authentication attempt and then providing that access. So the kind of the meat of it, how do you get there? So from an information standpoint, all of you have the availability of Azure Active Directory. A lot of you, I think we've worked with to implement multi-factor. Look at eliminating trusted locations. So is it okay that my on-premise environment is trusted? Well, it may or may not be. What are the requirements? Do you have NAP and NAC implemented in your environment? Do you have monitoring, so advanced threat in your environment? Are you monitoring Active Directory locally for compromised credentials, those type of things? Should you move to a zero trust model to not trust anything, even including your on-premises environment? As your users get more familiar with MFA, on the Microsoft implementation of MFA, it's not a prompt every time you log in. It's every so often, just when the signals are appropriate for it. You should be leveraging single sign-on and self-service password reset, so you've got the same security and things wrapped around it. Your users have more control over their identity. It takes you out of the middle of having to reset passwords and those type of things, but it's all wrapped in a secure environment that you can have control over. So again, it's that identity-based security piece. So I kind of put this out there as under identity, inspection, and intelligence, like the 3 I's. So, securing the identity, inspecting the signals, looking at the logs, understanding what you're doing, and looking at the intelligence on it. So reacting to those signals, leveraging the cloud to protect the cloud is becoming very important. This also will help you protect against known and unknown threats. So threats are new, they're coming out all the time. If you have these things in place, you're already going to have a leg up on preventing those. It's not 100%, but it's much better than, as I mentioned, just having MFA is going to prevent about 99% of your compromised credentials. So if they have to provide that secondary authentication proof up, then you're going to have an easier time with adoption. So again, I've mentioned it a couple of times. There's so many signals being produced. You think about all of the data that's coming in. Some of you I know already have a SIM. But as you start collecting that data, it's an avalanche of data. There's so many signals. Keeping up with the analysis and requirements, it becomes increasingly important to have some intelligence around what you're doing, looking at that information and being able to respond, even if it's just an alert or an automated response, depending on what services you're subscribed to. So speaking of services, what are some of the available tools as subscribers in the Microsoft ecosystem? There's a lot of different things that are out there, so we'll talk about all the overall landscape. You all have Azure Active Directory at some level. It's kind of the linchpin of a lot of this. Azure Active Directory provides conditional access and those signals, and it's that central repository for your identity, how users are authenticating. You have the options of Intune for Cloud App Security or MCAS. You have the options for information protection. So it's formerly called Azure Information Protection. It's being transitioned to Microsoft Information Protection. And that allows you to classify and protect your data depending on your license level. That can be automated as well to automatically protect or suggest particular labels for your information. Protecting your data, then if there is a leak, they still have to have the proper credentials through the rights management service to be able to actually open that information. Looking at advanced threat, so kind of on premises, you have the ability to do advanced threat, leverage the power of the cloud to look at the advanced threat analytics and detect the breaches before they cause any damage. And then extending things out, you have the Defender, Microsoft Defender for antivirus, advanced threat protection. It can be the policy engine on the endpoint and allows you to extend your logging and your analysis to your endpoints in the environment. I also have mentioned privilege identity management a few times. It is an extended license, but you can leverage privilege identity management to request any elevated privilege that you want and log those things so that you don't have any accounts sitting with permanent admin access. So next step, so I mentioned this is an iterative session or iterative process. So where do I go after identity? So thinking about it, now I've got a good handle on identity, what's next? So looking at device management with Intune, whether it's your workstations leveraging hybrid Azure AD join or Intune enrollment, leveraging Intune for MDM and MAM, those type of things, being able to add device signal as a part of your security environment is important. Leveraging privilege identity management, so no permanent elevated access. You also have the opportunity to restrict admin access to a location or a device. So I'm only going to allow administration of the service from on-premises or from a domain joined, hybrid Azure AD joined, enrolled machine. So those type of things. You should have or be considering delegated or dedicated admin accounts. So your normal user accounts don't have any permissions or extended permissions on them. There are some exceptions to that as you think about like service desk or operator account admins, those type of things, where it doesn't make sense. But look at dedicated admin accounts. You also should have what Microsoft refers to as break glass accounts. So they're secured accounts that are cloud-based only. If you lock yourself out of your environment as you implement these controls, which I've had happen, you have the ability to leverage a break glass account to regain control of your environment. It also helps if there's a catastrophic breach and someone takes control of your environment. You do have a break glass account out there that you can leverage to remediate that. We do have a number of future sessions on a lot of these other topics coming up, and I'll turn it back over to Chris to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers.
Thanks, Jim. So as Jim mentioned, this is the first part of our 6-part series. We do have the schedule up here for the other sessions, which I believe most of you have already registered for. So we look forward to seeing you at those sessions. But the topic that Jim just discussed with the identity-based security approach, this sets the foundation to all other security that we'll be talking about in these other sessions, because if you don't have a strong security approach or a strong security posture or identity posture, I'm sorry, everything else that we talk about, from reducing the attack surface, monitoring and managing access, controlling app access, all those topics, the identity will be your Achilles heel if you don't have a good handle on what your identity structure is. So I appreciate your insights here, Jim. We can move on to the next slide here and open up the floor to any questions. We didn't have any come in during the presentation other than Rick, but I want to take this time, if there's any questions that we can address those, even if they're loosely related to identity. Great, bring them up. We'll talk about whatever you have on your mind.
Question, Harry here. how does the Exchange threat 2 compare to your discussion here, and how effective? I believe it monitors web links embedded within emails, but how does that fit into your strategy, and how effective is that?
Chris, I can take that if you want.
Yeah.
So Exchange, obviously, I mentioned, kind of social engineering, and the phishing attacks. Actually, one of Rick's questions, the social engineering. So being able to take things that like leaders' names, and social engineer those, and then send them in from a, the display name looks right, but the email address is different. So, hey, Harry, send me, this is Lowell, send me your information on this. And you go, okay, yeah, I'll do that. The advanced threat pieces in Exchange are getting better and better to be able to trap those. We have a number of our customers that leverage third-party solutions, whether it's Barracuda or Proofpoint or Mimecast, for those kind of spoofing for them. They look at social engineering. You do also have the ability on the advanced threat protection pieces, to inspect links, to look at the links, whether it's in chat or in email, to protect against those as well. So it's all integrated.
I just want to make a comment. I actually have set that up myself on a friend of mine's machine. And I have seen people soliciting about, hey, you haven't made your payment to Microsoft for your monthly. And, it looks just like a Microsoft site, but it has, you can look at the link that you just mentioned, Jim, and you can see, and I forget how they rebranded, but it again, with just some basics, you can see that it's a rogue thread. Just I found it a pretty effective tool in email for people trying to use these different social engineering tools to get people to access their sites.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. Yeah, I know a number of our customers have implemented kind of testing for for phishing attacks. So they'll do a simulated attack and collect results and talk to the users that fall for it, but also help raise awareness of what the new attacks look like, and how those can come in, and to be a little more savvy as you look at email and not just click through things. It's kind of, you get conditioned to putting your credentials in to authenticate to cloud services, and then all of a sudden you get one that's a little different. How do you protect yourself against those?
Yeah, and I'd actually like to point out that with Microsoft does have a built-in tool for that. In Office 365, it does require the E5 license, though it's the attack simulator, where you can generate your own email based attacks. So if you wanted to create a spam phishing campaign to where you're mirroring either a service that you use, another third-party cloud service like DocuSign, you can create a fake email and see how many people you can trick in your own organization to click in the link and enter in credentials. Phishing is the #1 successful attack vector for cloud security. And the main reason for that is, Jim, you were just talking about all the identity stuff being the foundation to your security. If you give away your username and password, which is what a phishing email does, it tricks you into going to the site where you type in your username and password, you're undermining your security right there by just handing out your credentials. So, talking about things like MFA, and then even some of our other sessions coming up, we'll talk about some other ways to help protect against that. But that's a really good point, Harry, to bring up around the phishing, because that is the biggest risk from a credential-based perspective. Any other questions?
Just a final comment. Even if you don't have the E5, my customer didn't, or my friend didn't, and it's well worth. I think it's like $2 a mailbox. It's well worth it.
Yeah, for the advanced threat protection for Exchange Online. Yeah. Okay.
That was definitely smooth stuff. So I went back to the slide for the upcoming sessions that are out there. As you guys think about your environments and where you are, we've got these sessions coming up. We're also open to suggestions on sessions. If there's something that you'd like to see is related to all of this, it may not be directly as a topic of one of these, we can certainly integrate some of that information in as well. So we really appreciate you guys all joining today and taking time during your lunch hour. And as you have follow-ups or if you have questions about the presentation later, feel free to reach out to myself or to Chris, and we'll get your questions answered.
Yeah, I'll actually be sending out a survey, a follow-up survey message. And as Jim alluded to there, if there's anything that you guys want to hear about specifically that maybe was mentioned but we didn't dive into, such as privileged identity management, implementing and configuring that, definitely provide that in some feedback because our goal is to make these presentations and some of the content we provide via CSP valuable to all of our CSP clients. So if there is something you want to learn more about, definitely let us know, and the feedback form will be a way for you to communicate that back to us as well. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, no other comments, then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I appreciate everyone joining in and look forward to seeing everyone at our next webinar session in August. Thank you.
Thanks, great job. Thank you.